Billionaires want to keep the stench of racism out of smelling distance, so they put Cologne on Jim Crow. Check this out, Common Cause in Georgia. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. The second hour of our program. On the line with us is Aunna Dennis, the executive director of Common Cause Georgia. CommonCause.org/Georgia is the website. Common Cause GA is the Twitter handle. And Aunna, welcome back to the program. Give us an update on putting Cologne on Jim Crow. What's going on down there in Georgia?
Yeah, thank you, Thom, again for having me to talk more about what's going on down here in Georgia. So, like you said, it's putting Cologne on Jim Crow. It's Jim Crow suited up in a suit and tie. It's really the narrative of suppression that's going on down here. So right now we still have 3 omnibus catch-all bills that are attempting to suppress the vote of many Georgians across the state. We still see attacks to different provisions around vote by mail, different things like in-person voting, limiting early voting hours, and limiting drop box access. So these are some of the attacks that we're seeing. We're seeing other egregious things around, like taking over our boards of elections and different things like that. So we still see these different types of suppressive antics going on down here in Georgia.
Aunna, I have a question here, and it just calls for speculation on your part, but I've been thinking about this for a while. When you see people in line I used to live in Georgia. I lived in Cobb County, in a mostly white suburb, and then we moved up north to Roswell in an entirely white suburb. And I never literally, in my whole entire life, I don't think I've ever waited more than 10 or 15 minutes to vote. That's it. But the longest line was when I lived in Washington, D.C., and that was probably 30 minutes. And again, it was an area that was at least 60% white. And when you see people standing in line for 10 and 11 hours in Georgia because the people running the Republican Party, the people running those counties have decided that they're going to do everything they can to discourage people from voting, you get it that people are actually motivated to vote. And this largely happens in black neighborhoods. It also happens, though, in college areas and where in some cases where there's a lot of seniors who might be Social Security voters. Is it possible that these voter suppression efforts are just going to horribly backfire? That when they make it more difficult to vote, when they make it way more difficult to mail-in vote, keep in mind, Georgia legalized mail-in voting 15 years ago because they wanted older white people who were predominantly Republican to be able to easily and conveniently vote. That those Republican voters are not anywhere near as animated, excited, enthusiastic, upset, angry, pissed off, fill in the blank, right, as are the people who are who this voter suppression is nakedly trying to target. Do you think it's possible that people will say, okay, fine, you're going to make it harder to vote. We're going to try 3 times. You're going to make it twice as hard. We're going to try 3 times harder. And it's going to be a blowout election if they succeed in pass. I'm totally with you. We don't want this to happen. We want to make it easy for everyone to vote. Mm-hmm. But if they succeed, is it possible that they're shooting themselves in the foot?
Thom, I think you're hitting the nail. I definitely do think this may actually backfire because, like you mentioned, that 15 years ago, our vote by mail procedures was enacted by a Republican governor, Sonny Perdue, and a Republican-led legislator. And they did this because they did want predominantly white older voters to be able to come out and vote. But what they're doing with these different types of requirements, like having an ID, actually specifically a Georgia ID or a Georgia driver's license or the last 4 of your social, by adding those types of requirements, they're not just impacting brown folks, black folks, students, new majority communities that are merging to vote. They're also impacting their base. And so when I think about these things that they're trying to enact, I'm like, have they actually thought about the impact to their own populations and their own constituent bases? Because I do think this will have a backfiring impact that is going to actually impact all voters across the board in Georgia, not just a select few and not just a select few counties that they would like to want to dissuade people from voting in those counties. And personally, I know you said you've never waited more than 15 minutes outside of the Beltway, the Washington, D.C. area, but I've definitely waited over 4 to 6 hours. I remember when I first started to vote, when I was I believe it was the 2004 election, I waited in line with my great aunt for 4 to 6 hours. And this was before they had provisions on if you were disabled, you could jump the line. But we waited in line, and each election cycle, we still had to wait in line. And I will say I do live in a predominantly Black area, and I do live in a very populous county called Fulton County. So we definitely have to wait in line. And our elections boards, they have been very creative this cycle, and especially after our primary in June, where we saw people waiting in line 68 hours, where they had these mobile units. But now they've been told that with these mobile units, with this legislation, if it passed, they can only replace brick and mortar precincts and only be used for emergency purposes. So now they're still creating this line management problem without even having more provisional ballots and paper ballots on hand to handle the population and the emergency procedures that will be needed once we have this influx of people who are not able to do their vote by mail ballot and who will need to come to their precincts to vote.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you know, if it didn't come across that way, what I was flagging or pointing out by saying I've never in my life waited more than 15 minutes to vote was my own white privilege. You know, and the fact that white neighborhoods are not targeted like this the way that Black neighborhoods are, which just seems obscene. Given that Georgia Republicans are trying to make it harder ultimately for everyone to vote, wink nod, is any part of your strategy in combating this? We're talking with Aunna Dennis, of the executive director of Common Cause Georgia, commoncause.org/Georgia. Is any part of your strategy reaching out to, for example, older Georgia voters who have, you know, for the last decade and a half been using mail-in voting just because it's convenient, and you know, the older you get, the harder it is to get out and stand in line for hours or even minutes. You know, reaching out to those folks and saying, do you realize what your Republicans are trying to do? They're trying to hurt me, but they're going to hurt you.
Yeah, we're definitely reaching out to those targeted voters of those demographics. We're running phone banks, text banks. We definitely ask people from across the country to aid us in helping to reach out to these different types of communities to alert them of what's happening and what their legislatures are really trying to do. Because like you've mentioned, like I've mentioned, this just doesn't impact Black and brown voters or new communities of voters. This actually impacts all voters in Georgia. And folks forget that, yes, we have in the Atlanta metro area, we have over 5 million voters here, but we have over 3 million voters across the state who are in other pockets of area. And this really stands a chance to impact them, especially those rural communities who don't have transportation means to be able to get to a precinct or to get to early voting through these set hours of 9 to 5 is what they're trying to set them to, knowing that most people in Georgia go to work before 9 o'clock and they get off of work after 5 p.m.
Yeah, I'm with you. Forgive the interruption, but I see I've got 25 seconds left. What can people who are listening do to help you guys down there in Georgia at commoncause.org/Georgia? How can we help out?
Definitely get the message out, continue the conversations, follow us on our social media handles, definitely join into a text bank, a phone bank, and help us reach out to these hard-to-reach communities.
Great.